The 26th of November, 1941. Hitokappu Bay, Kuril Islands, northern Japan. In the freezing waters of this remote, fog-shrouded harbour, the most powerful naval strike force ever assembled prepares to vanish. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, 8 tankers, 23 submarines, and 353 warplanes fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers loaded, fueled, and ready to strike. Their target, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, 4,000 miles away across the Pacific. Their mission: destroy the United States Pacific Fleet in one devastating surprise attack. At dawn, the fleet weighs anchor and slips out of the bay into the open ocean. From that moment on, they disappear. No radio transmissions, no lights, no signals. For 12 days, the most powerful armada in the Pacific becomes a ghost. American intelligence has no idea they exist, and the architect of this audacious plan, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, is betting everything on surprise. But here's the twist. Yamamoto didn't want this war. He studied at Harvard. He traveled across America. He understood American industrial power better than anyone in the Japanese military. And he knew Japan couldn't win a long conflict. So he devised a plan so bold, so reckless, that it would either end the war before it began or doom Japan forever. This is the story of Operation Z, the master plan, the impossible gamble, and the brilliant, tragic mind who orchestrated the attack on Pearl Harbor. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was not a typical Japanese military leader. Born in 1884 inches Nagaoka, he had spent years in the United States, first as a student at Harvard University in the 1922nd, then as a naval attaché in Washington. He traveled across America. He visited factories in Detroit. He saw the oil fields of Texas. He walked the streets of New York and Los Angeles. And what he saw terrified him. Japan's entire annual steel production was less than what America produced in a single day. Japan had virtually no oil reserves. America was swimming in it. When Japan began planning for war with the United States in 1940, Yamamoto was one of the few voices of caution. He told Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe in a now famous quote, "If you insist on war with America, I can run wild for 6 months, maybe a year. After that, I guarantee nothing." It wasn't bravado, it was a warning. But Japan's military government was determined. In July 1941, the United States imposed a total oil embargo on Japan in response to Japanese aggression in China and Indochina. Japan's oil reserves would last less than 2 years. Without oil, the military would grind to a halt. The economy would collapse. Japan had 2 choices: back down and withdraw from China, losing face and abandoning its imperial ambitions, or go to war and seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies and British Malaya. The military chose war, but there was a problem. The US Pacific Fleet, stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was the only force capable of stopping Japan's southern expansion. So Yamamoto made a decision that would change history. If Japan was going to fight America, it had to strike first hard, fast, and without warning. His plan was unprecedented: launch a surprise carrier-based air attack on Pearl Harbor, destroy the US Pacific Fleet while it was anchored in port, and cripple America's ability to respond for at least a year. In that time, Japan could conquer Southeast Asia, fortify the captured territories, and force America to negotiate peace. It was a massive gamble. Aircraft carriers had never been used for such a long-range strike. The distance was too great, the logistics too complex, the risk of detection too high, and even if the attack succeeded, there was no guarantee it would knock America out of the war. But Yamamoto believed it could work. And in January 1941, he began planning what would become known as Operation Z, later renamed Operation Hawaii. The key to success was surprise. Total, absolute surprise. If the Americans detected the Japanese fleet before the attack, the plan would fail. If the US carriers were at sea instead of in port, the strategic value would be lost. If Japan lost too many aircraft or ships, the war would be over before it started. Everything had to be perfect. And for nearly a year, Yamamoto and his staff worked in total secrecy to make it happen. In February 1941, Yamamoto sent a private letter to his friend, Rear Admiral Onishi, outlining his radical plan. The letter was shown to Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most brilliant air tacticians. Genda was stunned. The plan was audacious, nearly impossible, but he believed it could work. Over the next months, Genda refined every detail. The first challenge: Pearl Harbor's shallow depth. The harbor was only 40 feet deep, far too shallow for standard aerial torpedoes, which dove to 100 feet or more before leveling out. If torpedoes hit the harbor floor, they would be useless. Japanese engineers solved the problem by attaching wooden fins to the torpedoes, allowing them to run at just 33 feet and stabilize quickly after release. The British had used a similar technique in their raid on the Italian naval base at Taranto in November 1940, an attack Yamamoto studied obsessively. The second challenge: training. Pilots had to master low-altitude torpedo runs, precision dive bombing, and coordinated formation attack. For months, they trained in Kagoshima Bay on the southern coast of Japan, which resembled Pearl Harbor's geography. They practiced again and again until every pilot could hit a moving target from 10,000 feet, drop a torpedo at wave height without crashing, or strafe an airfield with pinpoint accuracy. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, one of Japan's most experienced bomber pilots, was chosen to lead the attack. Meanwhile, Japanese intelligence gathered every scrap of information about Pearl Harbor. A spy network in Honolulu, led by Japanese consul Takeo Yoshikawa, monitored U.S. fleet movements daily. Yoshikawa posed as a tourist. He took boat tours of the harbor. He visited restaurants with views of the naval base. He counted ships, noted patterns, and sent detailed reports back to Tokyo. Reconnaissance planes disguised as commercial airliners photographed the harbor from above. Japanese engineers built detailed scale models of Pearl Harbor, Battleship Row, Ford Island, and the surrounding airfields: Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, Kaneohe Naval Air Station. Pilots studied the models until they could navigate the harbor blindfolded. But convincing the Japanese Naval General Staff to approve the plan was Yamamoto's hardest battle. The Naval General Staff was skeptical. They thought the plan was too risky. They wanted Japan's carriers focused on supporting the southern invasions of the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. In September 1941, the Navy conducted war games to test Yamamoto's plan. The results showed the attack was feasible, but also extremely risky and heavily dependent on surprise. The Naval General Staff remained unconvinced, so Yamamoto played his final card. He threatened to resign if the plan was rejected. Yamamoto was the most respected admiral in Japan. Losing him would be a disaster for morale. The Naval General Staff gave in. By November 1941, the plan was finalized. The strike force would consist of 6 aircraft carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, the most powerful carrier fleet ever assembled. They would carry 353 aircraft, 49 high-altitude bombers armed with armor-piercing bombs, 40 torpedo bombers, 51 dive bombers, and 43 Zero fighters for air cover. The first wave would launch 183 planes. The second wave would follow with 170 more. The target list was precise: battleships first, then aircraft carriers if present, then cruisers, destroyers, airfields, and fuel depots. The goal: sink or cripple at least 6 battleships, destroy as many planes as possible on the ground, and leave Pearl Harbor in ruins. And it all had to happen in less than 2 hours. On the 17th of November 1941, Yamamoto issued the final coded order to the strike force: climb Mount Niitaka. Mount Niitaka was the highest peak in the Japanese Empire. The phrase meant, "The attack is approved. Execute the plan." The 26th of November 1941, Hitokappu Bay. The fleet departs under cover of darkness and heavy fog. No fanfare, no ceremony, just silence. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands on the bridge of the flagship Akagi and watches the other carriers fall into formation behind him. Nagumo is a cautious man. He's not an aviator, he's a torpedo and destroyer specialist. He doesn't fully trust carrier warfare. But Yamamoto chose him because he's reliable, methodical, and follows orders. Nagumo knows the risks. If they're detected, the entire operation fails. If the weather turns, they may have to abort. If the US carriers aren't in port, the attack loses much of its strategic value. But Yamamoto has ordered total radio silence. No communications, no transmissions, nothing that could give away their position. For the next 12 days, the strike force will be invisible. The route takes them north, through the roughest, most desolate waters of the Pacific, far from commercial shipping lanes, far from patrol planes, far from anyone who might see them. The weather is brutal. 30-foot waves crash over the decks. Ships pitch and roll in the heavy seas. Sailors get seasick. Equipment breaks. Refueling at sea becomes a nightmare. Tankers struggle to keep pace. Hoses snap in the rough water. Fuel spills onto the decks. But the fleet presses on. On December 2, Yamamoto sends a coded message from Tokyo. Climb Mount Niitaka, 1208. It confirms the final attack date, December 8, Tokyo time, December 7 inches, Hawaii. There is no turning back now. On December 6, the fleet reaches the launch point, 2.75 miles north of Oahu. Japanese submarines stationed near Pearl Harbor send final reconnaissance, reports via coded radio bursts. The US Pacific Fleet is in port. 8 battleships confirmed. No aircraft carriers. The carriers USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga are at sea on training missions or undergoing repairs on the mainland. It's not perfect. Yamamoto wanted the carriers. They're the future of naval warfare, but 8 battleships are still a prize worth taking. Nagumo gives the order, prepare to launch. At 6 a.m. on the 7th of December 1941, the first wave begins launching from the carriers. Commander Fuchida climbs into his Nakajima B-5N bomber, engine roaring, deck crews scrambling. One by one, 183 aircraft take off into the pre-dawn darkness. Fuchida leads the formation south toward Oahu, 230 miles away. The sun is rising, the sky is clear, and Pearl Harbor has no idea they're coming. As the island emerges from the morning haze, Fuchida looks down. He sees the harbor, the battleships lined up in neat rows, the airfields with planes parked wing to wing. Everything is exactly where intelligence said it would be. At 7:53 a.m., Fuchida raises his flare gun and fires, the signal to attack, and then he radios the code word back to the fleet. Tora, Tora, Tora. Tiger, Tiger, total surprise achieved. 2 minutes later, the first bombs fall on Pearl Harbor. So here's the question. Was this brilliant strategy or the biggest mistake Japan ever made? Yamamoto's plan worked flawlessly. The attack devastated Pearl Harbor. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged, hundreds of planes destroyed, over 2,400 Americans killed. But there was one fatal flaw. The US aircraft carriers weren't there, and within 6 months, those carriers would win the Battle of Midway, sinking 4 Japanese carriers and turning the tide of the Pacific War forever. Yamamoto had warned Japan's leaders, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I guarantee nothing." He was almost exactly right. The attack on Pearl Harbor united America like nothing else could. It transformed American public opinion overnight from isolationism to total war. Japan won the battle, but it lost the war. So what do you think? Was Pearl Harbor a masterstroke of military genius that failed because of bad luck? or a strategic disaster that doomed Japan from the start? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want the rest of the story, the moment the bombs hit Battleship Row, the heroes who fought back, and Roosevelt's response, subscribe now. Because this is just part 2 of 5. And part 3 is the most devastating chapter of all. See you in part